This is a serious topic, but I will try to put some humor into it. Just a little bit of history about me. I don't like talking about myself that much. I came to Vienna in 1975 and studied psychology and music here at the university. Went off to Switzerland, continued studying the same things, and eventually got into IT. I grew up in an IT type of family. My father was a nuclear physicist, and the research lab that he was at was the first Unix beta site outside of AT&T. So I learned C from Dennis Ritchie himself. I still have an original signed copy of the Old Testament at home. Yes, I also did punch cards. And back in the mid-'80s, I started getting into the field of artificial intelligence and discovered an interesting programming language named Smalltalk. And in the course of my work with Smalltalk in the late 80s, I got in contact with and started working together with two gentlemen who influenced me very strongly. First one, his name was Cunningham. I don't know, is anybody familiar with Cunningham? I programmed with Ward on the original wiki. That's his development. The other gentleman's name is Kent Beck. Does anybody know Kent Beck? Kent and I came in contact for a long time, until in the mid-90s he moved over to Switzerland after he did the first extreme programming project at Chrysler. And I went on and worked as his assistant for 3 years, developing what you know as extreme programming. At that time, people were saying, no, this can't possibly work. But the funny thing was, it did. And I, weird as I am, started asking, well, if people say it can't work, but it does, why does it work? And this question has driven me for the past almost 20 years to find out why this stuff works. And that's brought me into the relatively new field of social complexity science. And I've gone even further now, and I'm back at the university and doing my PhD in psychology to understand more about the fact that software development is something that has to do with people. And what I'd like to talk with you about today is about Agile in general and Scrum as one of the disciplines in particular. I sound like Barry White. Agile in general and Scrum in particular from the point of view of complexity science and psychology. And I'll explain to you how I got to certain thoughts that I got. But the interesting thing, being now back at the university and studying psychology, does anyone here have a degree in psychology, by the way? Oh, okay. Okay, there's somebody hiding in the back there, so don't worry, I'm not going to ask you any questions. But you know that when you study psychology, you don't automatically become a person who can read everyone else. You don't automatically become a psychotherapist. You don't automatically become a forensic profiler who can go to crime scenes and say who did it. When you study psychology, most of what you do is perform experiments on innocent little first and second semester students. And then average age 19, standard deviation plus minus 1 year, 75% female. And then you run an amazing amount of statistic tests on them until you find the statistic test that gives you the answers that you want to have. Okay? So this is interesting to see how things get correlated with each other. And once you learn to do this, once you're in this mindset, you start looking at other possible correlations in life. And I like to do something like this to get me warmed up to an audience and get the audience warmed up to me. I'd like to show you a couple other correlations that you might find interesting. Did you know that the murder rate in the USA decreased currently with the increasing use of Internet Explorer? Constantly, thanks to Firefox and Chrome. But actually, this is a popular, and this isn't as scientific as I would like it to be. Now, something that would be more to my life would be this. Did you know that the increase in autism is directly related to the increase in people eating organic foods? Here are the studies, and if you understand anything about psychology and statistics, Pearson's R, correlation coefficient is 99%, and you have a p-value. Now, you know, what p-values mean nowadays is nothing, but there's a very strong correlation here between these things. And here's another one, and I have to bring this one in because I am Swiss. The correlation between number of Nobel Prize winners and the amount of chocolate consumed by a Hey, I said you're not going to laugh. This is science. This is serious science. Sorry, Austria, you're pretty far up there. In any case, you're higher than Germany, but... and there are other things that... I enjoy doing this research and comparing that also with colleagues of mine. One of my colleagues who I work a lot with is a gentleman named Vasco Duarte, who I met when he was working as an Agile coach at Nokia, and the work that we together did on estimating led to him co-inventing the no estimates movement. Another one of my colleagues who works in that realm is Dave Nicolette, and I'd like to show you one of Dave's thoughts about the problems that we have with estimating and finding velocity. This is something that Dave sent me. How many elephant points are there out there developed? Well, if we conduct a poll of the herds, we find that herd A reports 50,000 kilos, herd B reports 84 legs, herd C reports 92,000 pounds, herd D reports 24 heads, herd E reports 546 elephant sounds per day, herd F reports elephant skin RGB values of 192, 192, 192. I'm sorry, this should actually be in hex, but it doesn't. Herd G reports an average height of 11 feet, so there are 50,000 plus 84 plus 92,000 plus 24 plus 546 plus 192 plus 11 equals 142,857 elephant points in the belt. The average herd has 20,408.1428571.3 elephant points. And this is a number you can tell your manager. This is important because there's a decimal point. Now, this is a serious correlation. Now, if we take this mindset, more or less funny, more or less serious, of doing analysis from the point of view of psychology and complexity, and turn it on a more serious topic, Agile. The word Agile is empty. It's an empty shell that people fill with whatever meaning they want to put into it. And this is a great difficulty. The word lean has the same. The word priority has the same. And these are big linguistic, psycholinguistic problems that we juggle with. So, I want to give you a thought, something that really moved me. It was shown to me by my dear friend and colleague, Steve Freeman. And when he told it to me, I was just totally shocked. I want to give it to you because I think this is so important to show what the state of Agile is right now. Every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. Und jetzt, damit ihr das alle genau versteht, will ich, dass ihr das mal auf Deutsch liest. Genau versteht, was da dahinter steckt. Das ist wahnsinnig wichtig. Seht ihr das? Wo sind wir jetzt? Wir sind schwer in der Absockerei. Okay, I'm going to switch back to English now. I thought this was so important that I wanted to be sure that you got the exact wording. We're in the racket phase. We're past the point of it being business. And that means the rules have changed. And I was shortly in Christian and Ralph's talk just before, and it seems that there are a number of other people who are going to do Agile Manifesto bashing today. So I might as well start. I did not sign the Agile Manifesto. I was babysitting one of Kent's teams while he was there. But from the point of view of doing a psychological study, let's do some analysis on the population cohort that are the Agile Manifesto authors. Did you ever analyze who wrote and who signed the Agile Manifesto? N is 17. Only 17 people. All white males. 16 of the 17 American. Harry van Durham is the only one who was not American. Mean age, 46.3 years, with one standard deviation being 8.5 years. Look at the age in the business right now. All stars. And all independent consultants. Now, to call this a statistically skewed population sample is an understatement. What can possibly come out of a group like this? Complexity theory. Ashby's law of requisite variety says that with this lack of heterogeneity, the system will never evolve. It will actually inbreed to force out the worst traits of any inbreeding system. What could possibly come from these starting conditions? What came, I'm going to be brutal, is the least common denominator of what these people could agree on as a mutual non-aggression pact. Let's not step on each other's feet. That's what came. What arose out of that are problems. Warning. Big words here. Some problems that came out. It is a lack of what we call ecological validity. Allgemeingültigkeit. So, Realitätscheck. Is this really valid overall, or is this just valid for one point of segment? Ontological myopia. This is Fencourt-60. This is the idea that one size, one method fits all possible development schemes. Okay? And what that leads to is a yes, but. Mine's better than yours. Mine is superior because the other one is worse. And there may be people here today talking about their methods and saying this is good because the other method sucks. My studies, and I've written papers about this. If you need to fall asleep, you can read my papers. But I've written papers about the thing is that we're in such a multi-ontological space that we need a number of frameworks, a number of methods that all can and should work together. It's not an either or, Scrum or Kanban or whatever method you're using. All of them have their place, and all of them fit together. One of the greatest projects I did last year, I did together with the PMI guru. And we had so much fun doing it because we were able to go past the, yes, well, Scrum says, or yes, well, the PM box says. And that's what I'd like to give you in this talk today, is how do you jump past that and say, well, what is Agile really? What is Scrum really? What are we trying to do? And not just get stuck on the practices. Okay? And another issue is that as it became a business, as the big money came, people had to find unique selling points, had to find differentiators. And they started doing that by becoming more prescriptive and less declarative. More prescriptive means telling you what to do, and you must do things this way. You must start cooking according to this recipe. And what that did was, well, people didn't have to take the responsibility. They just had to cook according to the recipe. And of course, if it didn't work out, it's because you couldn't read and you couldn't cook well enough. There was no questioning of whether that recipe really worked in this situation or not. And these are some of the things that resulted out of that. And essentially, to misquote Alexander Maslow, if all you're selling is a hammer, everyone's problems look like a nail. Now, by the way, remember, I am a scientist, so this quote actually has the source on it, if anybody wants to read. So, I am not going to go through the whole Agile manifesto and bash that. We can do that afterwards when we're drinking beer. But for right now, let's just take a look at one thing to say. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This is actually interesting. This reflects the American mindset and the emphasis on the individual. I think for a method or a set of methods that have to deal with teams, this word individual doesn't belong there. First thing we're looking at is, yes, the individual. Over processes and tools. Well, guess what? What do all, or almost all of those 17 original signers of the Agile Manifesto sell? Processes and tools. So if we simply look at this like a mathematical equation, where processes and tools are a divisor, solve for X, what's that going to give us? Think about it. And this is a time where I like to go back to my old mentor, Kent Beck, who incidentally refused to go to the 10 years anniversary of the Agile Manifesto because he essentially disassociated himself from it. One of the things that Kent told me that I found really important is this old sentence. Listen, test, code, refactor. That's all there is to software. Anyone who says differently is trying to sell you something. That was written back in 1998. So what I've noticed is there's especially in the world of Scrum, that's one of the many methods I use, but it happens to be one that I'm known most for. In the world of Scrum, that what a lot of people think and write about and teach is something that I call fairy tale Scrum. Now, fairy tale Scrum is, that's what you hear about in the course, and that's where you have a full-time product owner who sits there with the team and actually knows what he's talking about and has the power to make his own decisions. You have a cross-functional team of course, 7 plus minus 2 people, right? Who are totally dedicated to that and don't have to do any multitasking. You have a full-time Scrum Master because your management supports you and believes that that's a good thing to have. And the birds and the bees fly around and everything is nice. I work in the real world, as many of you do. In the real world, it's not Cinderella, it's this. I'm going to sit down here for a minute. Back in 2010, I had one of these experiences which shook me up and really started me to question what I was doing and how I was doing it. I had the chance, really the honor, to take on a job, an interim job as CTO of a little company called eBay. Anybody familiar with them? It's a little online. And eBay got me in as interim CTO. And there I sat and started questioning everything that I was doing, because every second we were offline, we would lose a 4-digit sum in euros on transaction fees per second offline. 10 minutes offline meant we were starting a loss of brand name value. Brand name value, that's what you hear. Oh, the mark Coca-Cola is worth so many billions. The mark eBay is worth a lot too. But if you're offline, you start losing that value, which is what you can sell advertising for and things like that. And then I started questioning, Am I willing to risk my ass? You can cut that out of the video. Am I willing to risk such a company because Scrum says, because it's written in some book, because somebody teaches that in a course, because I even teach it as a course? Remember, I am a certified Scrum trainer. And you know what that means? That means I can put up my hands like this, and by the powers, the magic powers I have, I can make you all understand Scrum. Right. So I started really questioning this. I said, okay, this is I guess one of the problems I have with a lot of so-called coaches and trainers is that they don't take responsibility. This is the coaching by helicopter. Come in, throw a lot of dust and fly off. Or even worse is what coaching by pigeon, come in and most of the past 6 years I've been involved in interim management because I wanted to make bigger changes and because I wanted to be able to take responsibility. Coming in 6 months to a year, working for a company, actually doing something and seeing something happen. And that's a different type of work than just going in for a week or two. And so I started thinking about what kind of process can I do? And I was lucky to work for a company then that had money and wanted to push the envelope of what was possible and was willing to invest that money in experimenting. And we came up with some very interesting results that I'm not allowed to talk about here, but a beer afterwards. But what I would like to do is I also went back to some of the basics of the things I learned about complexity science and about psychology and started thinking, well, if I don't want to be prescriptive, don't want to say, well, you have to do that because Scrum says that, how can I go about building a process? And one of the things I thought back, one of the classics of complexity science is how birds fly, how birds flock. Now it's obvious it's getting to be winter, so birds will be migrating down to the Riviera, to the south coast, and laying out there and drinking caipirinhas while we have to stay up here, and it's snowing. And in April then they come back all nice and suntanned, and we're jealous. So how do birds actually fly? How do they migrate down? Well, everybody knows, of course, that birds call up the airport and they put in a flight plan and they get the weather report and then they have the pre-flight briefing with the union representatives where they decide who has seniority and who gets to fly at the front for how long and how long are they allowed to fly before they have to do their union mandated breaks. No one has ever told birds that. Birds fly according to a different thing. And these are the way the complex system works. Birds fly according to 3 basic rules. First rule, don't crash. Don't bump into each other. That's bad. Second rule, keep to the same speed. Don't fly too fast, don't fly too slow, just keep together. And third, fly towards the center of the flock. Now if you fly towards the center, but you're avoiding crashing, you'll tend to fly in parallel. What do we have here? We have 3 basic principles. Principle 1, autonomy, autonomous agents, that people are empowered to make their own choices. Second, cohesion, that we try to stay together as a group. And third, alignment. That's all we need. Actually, if you go onto YouTube, you'll find someplace a video. I gave this talk at an Agile conference in the States many years ago and actually got the whole crowd up and we went out and ran around the conference hall just obeying these rules. And somebody actually posted it on YouTube. Okay, so hold on for a second. Yes, I am a scientist. These rules came from Craig Reynolds. And what they essentially define are the rules he used for animating the flights of birds in the first Jurassic Park movie. These are, you can Google Reynolds and Boyd's, B-O-I-D-S, and you can find out there's a number of simulations in different languages of this. So I took a step back and said, I looked at this like a tree. I don't have a slide of a tree in here. And I said, if I had a tree of Scrum, then up at the top, all these practices, everything that you think that Scrum is, your roles, your product owner, your Scrum master, your team, your many meetings, your sprint planning and review, and what they're all called, and all your documents and artifacts, your backlogs and stuff. Those are just the leaves. That's not what Scrum's about. And I will argue with you, that's not really what Scrum is about. Those are the leaves that grow out of the tree. The tree itself, for me, is a set of basic principles or basic rules. And I maintain that if you learn, you understand these rules and figure out how to do them, what you will get is a process that's going to smell just like Scrum, but it's going to work even better for you because it's going to be matched. Essentially solve the equation with the variables of your organization. And not do this because Scrum said it, but say this is what we want to achieve. By the way, doing it Scrum way is a pretty good way to do it, but if you can't do that, you're not stuck up a creek. You find another way to achieve this goal. And I could actually go back. We used to do this talk for extreme programming. And all the extreme programming practices, we also analyze that. You don't do pair programming because we do pair programming. There are reasons because you're trying to achieve something with that. So, okay, to continue the tree metaphor, the roots of the tree are the core values that we have. Commitment, focus, openness, respect for others, and courage. If your management doesn't live that, you'll never be agile anyway, because a tree will never grow. But if you have these principles and you understand them, and the tree adopts to the situation that it's in, then the practices will grow, and out of those practices, whatever they may be, some good fruits, some good products may grow out of that. So what are these rules? It's going to be very simple. I have 3 rules and 3 basic questions. Rule number 1. We don't make mistakes, we learn. One of the problems in complex systems is that we don't have order in the system the way we do in a classic order or simple or complicated system. Order, in terms of causality, cause and effect, means that I do something, something happens. I do it again, exactly the same thing happens. This gives us a really nice predictability. Right? If I turn the light off, press the button again, it will come on. Every time I do that, the same thing will happen. But this leads us to be complacent, because this is a transitive bidirectional property, which means if I do this, if I do A, then B happens. And we start saying, well, if I want B to happen, all I have to do is A. And this is the mindset that we've grown up with. And if we bring this in a complex space, we say, oh, we want this to happen, all we do is this, and shit happens. Right? Because complex systems don't work like that. Complex systems are based on the constant changes in so many variables that you can never plan, never predict. So there are different ways that we have to deal with complex systems, and they essentially entail setting up the starting conditions so that good things can naturally happen, avoiding things that will cause bad things to happen, and then constantly monitoring to make sure you go in the same direction. So we cannot know in advance in a complex system if what we do is going to be successful or not. So one of the worst things you can do is punish people for learning, for experimenting. That's what this is about. My dear friend Dave Snowden, no relation to Ed Snowden. Dave Snowden is a complexity theorist who's also my mentor, says that if you can't have this fail-safe system, you must have a safe-to-fail environment. You must have a space where you're able to learn, and where this can happen so simply and so easily. If you do it often enough, it doesn't feel like failing anymore. It feels like learning. So think about what happens when you learn to ride a bicycle. Is there anyone here who has a child that has yet to learn how to ride a bicycle? Oh boy, just wait. Now what happens when you learn to ride a bicycle? I remember this with my father. I had a little bicycle with training wheels on the sides. And I get on the bicycle and I ride all around the neighborhood. Well, my father says, great, you can ride, so let's move the training wheels up a little bit more. Now, my father didn't actually tell me that. He did that in the night when I was sleeping. And the next day when I came out and said, Daddy, weren't the training wheels low yesterday? He said something about optical illusion or something. And eventually they were so high that my father decided it's time to take them off. Now, I love my father. He's a great man. My father was a nuclear physicist. But that brings also other problems with it. So when he was taking the things off, that's when I got my first lesson in trigonometry, where he said, look, the wheels are so high, they're only going to touch the ground when the bicycle's on its side anyway, so it's not going to help you. Right. But it gave me this false sense of security that contracts give you too, right? So we took it off. And imagine what happens. You do this. You get on the bicycle, gives you a push, you go for about 2 meters, fall on your side, and then you start crying, and Daddy comes in, dusts you off, fixes the bicycle, and comes and says to you in his nicest voice, you idiot, you'll never learn. How many of us would ride bicycles if our first attempts, first learning experiences were punished? I agree, there are other circumstances where you have to do a lot of planning in advance, because if you don't get it right the first time, you're probably not going to do it again. Skydiving. But for most of the cases, it's not like that. Okay, examples. Okay, now I know that a number of you have young children. How do children learn to walk? What is necessary so that a child can learn to walk? 3 things. You have to believe it's possible, right? You have to believe that anybody can learn to walk. Now, obviously, you all got in this room, so we've passed that test. Second, you can't expect perfection immediately. So when your child took his or her first steps, I really hope you didn't run to them at the stopwatch and say, shit, that's not going to be good enough for the next Olympics. And third, you give them positive feedback with every step they take. Positive feedback on every good step they take. And it's like, you see mommy holding the little kid and letting it go and walks a couple steps, boom, falls on the floor. And a mother could actually say, look, just stay down on the floor, otherwise you'll have problems with your back like Joseph and have to keep sitting down. No, what does the mother do? Picks the kid up again, lets him walk a couple other steps, boom, fall on the floor, pick up again, boom, fall on the floor. Like bungee jumping in slow motion. Until eventually, what the mother's actually trying to do is get the kid to walk enough steps by itself that she can grab the camera on her smartphone, take pictures, and spam all the relatives. Right? But she could just as easily say, look, stay down on the floor. Cats and dogs like it down there. Well, good. No, we can't do something. We can't know that what we do is going to be successful. And that is impossible by definition of complexity. We have to set up a space where we can learn. And even if we are in an ordered system, it's good to set up this space to learn and see how can we improve ourselves. And actually, in Scrum, we have that space. Scrum actually has a ritual for this, and it's called the retrospective. This is a point in time where we stop and say, hey, well, what did we learn? What are we going to do to get better at this? Second rule. Whoever takes the risk decides. How often have you encountered the problem that people start making decisions for things that they've taken no risk or responsibility for? System architect is a good example. Ivory tower, these type of things. How often have you seen that customers give estimates? How often have you seen that developers come and say, oh, this would be really cool to have this in the product? Hey, come on, it goes both ways. Making it clear who takes what risks and what takes responsibilities and who has what decision power is an important part of organizing anything, whether it's Scrum or not. And actually, this is the way that I implement Agile processes, is I don't say, well, we have these roles and they happen to be called this, and if you have this role, then you have to do this. I say, no, we have these responsibilities. Who's going to take over this responsibility? And whoever takes over a certain responsibility gets a name, and it may be one of the traditional Scrum names if it's a traditional responsibility. But I've changed because the circumstances have called it. I've changed and left out Scrum roles. It is very difficult because those are core responsibilities, but I've added on other roles for teams where that made sense, and it helped that team to improve. Okay. So, third, if it's not fun, you're doing something wrong. How often? I spent a lot of my career as a consultant flying around over 300,000 flight miles per year, over 200 nights in hotels and stuff, looking into companies. And I've seen so many broken and abusive relationships in the workplace that I think if our private lives would be like that, divorce rate would probably be 90%. But no, we're in business, and we put this sugar over the top and say, oh, it's all okay. But under the surface, of course, everything's gone. And what's happening there? Now you go back to the core value of respect. You get the best people you can get for your company. These are people who've managed their studies, people who've managed their lives, their careers, their families. You bring them in and you treat them like little kids. And you tell them what they have to do, you tell them how they have to do it, and you tell them how long they have to do it. Is that respect? Is that going to be fun for them? Is that going to be motivating? As soon as you tell someone what to do, you steal from them the chance that they can take responsibility and identify with something and have fun doing something. You cannot give responsibility, you can only take it. And allowing people to take responsibility is a very motivating thing to do. If you don't do it, if you just tell them what to do, what do you get? Not my fault, he told me to do it. You don't get that identification. It's like also like other relationships, right? If you don't get it at home, you look for it outside. That's translated into open source development, of course. Why do some world-class developers spend their evenings, their weekends, writing open source software for free? What does she have that I don't have? It's fun, it's motivating. And that's something we've lost. And that's something we have to get back. So, on the other side, in contrast to the rules, there are a number of basic questions that I also use. And this is a classic one. When do you want to know you have a problem? After 2 weeks in a 6-month project? After 2 years in a 6-month project? Do you ever want to know that you have a problem? Obviously, the earlier the better. The more resources you have available to do that. And this also fits in quite well with that first rule that I had, is that we don't make mistakes, we learn. You're going to have space for learning, but you still want to work economically, right? And you want to make sure that your changes that happen are small and painless. Essentially, how long do you want to drive in the wrong direction before you realize that you have to make a U-turn and drive back? Right? Give people a chance to learn how to drive, but you want to monitor them. So you need your feedback loops. As many, as often, but as non-intrusive as possible. Set that up. The second one, this comes from Kent Beck, comes from way, way back. How much are you prepared to throw away? How much are you prepared to invest in analysis, design? Remember those old things? Well, you still have to do it sometimes. How much are you prepared to invest in estimating, in planning, in stuff, if you don't know what the world is going to be like next week? Now, thinking in historical context, the Agile movement started around the time of the first internet bubble, late 90s, around 2000. And the goal there was to find the simplest thing that could possibly work that a company could get onto the market to do an IPO and an exit. Which means that companies that survived were held together essentially by string and chewing gum. And there was a lot of work, there's still a lot of work around for people, helping them become stable and scale up to become modern level systems. But I remember some of the first XP projects that Kent and I did, where we didn't know from one week to the next if there would be a next week. If this was back in 1998 or 1999, I was giving this talk, I would start with the question, what would you do differently if your customer could only pay you for one day? What would you do differently than you do now? He can only pay you for one day. Now, at the end of that day, if you can give him something that he can make money with, he can pay you for another day. That was the basic idea behind XP. What really brings value? And Ron Jeffrey coined the term then, running tested features. Now, one thing that I find important that a lot of people forget is that every iteration, every sprint delivers two things. You might not have learned that in your Scrum course. Every iteration delivers two things. It delivers product increment, what we used to call the potentially shippable increment of executable functionality. And I had to practice saying that fast to become a Scrum trainer. But now we just call it a product increment. People get in easier as Scrum trainers. The second thing that every sprint delivers is information. And information, knowledge, is risk management. Something that helps you make better decisions. Ron Jeffries always used to say, I'll be smarter tomorrow than I am today. So if I can delay making that decision until tomorrow, with more information, I'll make a better decision. Chris Matt's whole idea of real options builds on this idea. How long can we delay? How long can we wait? But how much are you willing to invest if you don't know what direction you're going to be going in next week? And the third question is a psychological question. What is this really telling you? What does this behavior pattern, what does this observation that you see actually then mean to you? Because psychologically we suffer from a number of ingrained behavior patterns. Something called fundamental attribution error is one of the main ones. Now, for example, I see Jeff Patton back there. Hi, Jeff. He came in late. Lazy bugger, can you ever come into my talks on time? No, I don't know if he doesn't like me or not. So, what happened here? Nice to see you. We're talking. What happened is, I saw him come in late. This is a cognitive model that we call OIC. So, OIC. The OIC model says we start with an observation, that's the O. And out of that observation, I drew a C, a conclusion, saying that, if he comes in late, it's because he's a lazy bugger, he's not interested in me, and stuff like that. And he's going to probably heckle me afterwards. But what happens is between this observation and this conclusion is the I, is the interpretation of the behavior pattern. Now, if you look at it, this O, the observation has to do with him. Everything else has nothing at all to do with him. It all has to do with me. Why do I interpret this behavior pattern in this way? Well, it's obvious because I'm Swiss and I have a Swiss watch and I know that we start on time. It's based upon my value system. So I have to do some double loop learning, look at my cognitive biases, look for confirmation bias, look for filtering information that might confirm that. But also fundamental attribution error essentially says that I'm thinking the reason he comes in is because he doesn't like me. Whereas the reason he came in late is because he was a very polite gentleman, and probably I saw him out there helping this little old lady walk over the street with her bags and stuff, and he's really nice. But by assuming something, you close your eyes. You close your eyes to catching the weak signals that can tell you in which direction your team and your project is really going. And you're just tricking yourself. But these are very important things to talk about. So, I'm going to go back to one of the old sayings that Kent Beck also had, and that's, I'd rather have a shorter talk and a longer coffee break than vice versa. So I'm going to give you one last slide, and then I'm going to take a break early, so we have more time for you to talk and get to know each other. And I'm also available, and Jeff is also going to be available. I just made him available for questions here. So essentially what I'm... Yeah. So what I'm thinking about now, the direction I'm going into is a different type of MVP. Something that I call the minimum viable process. How much process do you actually need, and what process is that? If you want to start out, if you have a team just starting out, doing Scrum by the book is okay. But remember, if you do Scrum by the book because it's in the book, you're not doing Scrum. You're following a religion. Do Scrum by the book as a learning experience to find out where it hurts. Find out your pain points and find out where you can get better. This is one thing that I remember an old saying from Ken Schraber. Scrum is like your mother-in-law who thinks that you're not good enough for their child. And she sits at home in the kitchen all day and reminds you of that fact. So doing Scrum by the book is a very good learning experience, but it's the starting point. You have to get beyond that. Okay. So I'd like to say thank you for listening.